Dr. T.HasanJohnson, how are you doing?
Doing all right, brother. Doing all right, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You see, I have my Ohio State football swag. Got to do
I
that. Got to
see.
do that.
That's right. All right.
That was some nice vindication there. Some nice vindication. Nobody gave us a shot. They thought that 6 games wasn't enough, but I guess it was. You know, it's interesting because I actually thought it at the beginning. I thought that 6 games was going to be a benefit because the teams start getting beat up, and players getting injured and stuff, middle of the season or whatever. And then when we got to game 5 and 6, I was like, we need more games because we were not looking good at all. But then we came in and played Clemson tough. So we'll see what happens on January 11th.
All right. All right. You sound like you got the plan together.
Yeah, that's right. So I had to do my my football thing. This is I've been on a break from doing interviews since let's see here. What was the last interview I did? It was I think it was the 21st of December. And so this is the first time, my first chance to represent. So I want to make sure I do that. All right. Anyhow, so I follow Kevin Samuels, and that cat has a jetpack on his back these days.
Right.
Quite incredible ascendancy. It's interesting because this guy has been putting out content for a long time, really quality, good stuff for a long time. And for a long time, up until the last 6 months, he was focusing on men, and he was as much negative stuff comes his way for the stuff that he's been saying, the controversial stuff that he's been saying, which actually I don't even think is controversial, by the way. About women, this dude has been going even harder on men, and for a long time, in a constructive way, not trying to tear anybody down, but trying to say, hey, you got to get your stuff together. But I saw you on his program a few months ago, and he frequently talks about you and your research and stuff, and so that was sort of my gateway into starting to check you out. And I watch your Onyx report, and
thank you.
We recently became friends on Facebook, and I started paying closer attention to a lot of the kind of stuff that you post, which is it shouldn't be this way, but I can see that it takes a lot of bravery, I think, to post the kinds of stuff that you post with irregularity. It shouldn't be that way. It seems obvious to me. It seems that black men, black boys in particular, need someone to defend them and to say, hey, look, this isn't right. And it seems obvious that this sort of white feminism does not help black people.
Right.
Very negative to us.
Right.
So, so I'm just curious. Maybe you can talk to us about how you grew up, and what got you interested in masculinity studies. What got you maybe an origin story about you tend to be pretty red pill in your content, so maybe you're an origin story into that Yeah,
and
we'll just kind
that's
of
interesting.
chop it up.
Well, that's interesting because nobody's ever asked, and I don't talk a lot about myself, not to any great extent, because as an academic, you're taught that it's supposed to be objective. So it kind of, after, 20 odd years, you just kind of forget to talk about yourself. And if nobody asks it doesn't come to mind. But I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised in the Bay Area, San Jose, Santa Clara, a few places like that. I was, single mother, parents divorced at 5. So we literally didn't live anywhere longer than 2 years. She was constantly moving for work, and it was myself and a younger sister. And that was kind of it. I saw my father, who was an ex-Panther, annually for a while, and, eventually moved in with him and his new wife right around 7th grade. So the whole emphasis on masculinity for me started early, as did, a lot of it for men of my generation, Black men of my generation, because we were, Generation X was really the first generation that really started living this single parent life. It's really the late 60s throughout the 70s, where you really start to see this rise in single parenthood. And my generation was the one that really came into young adulthood, having lived this life. And for men, young men, we all had a lot of misplaced aggression, a lot of frustration, a lot of questions without answers, as far as what was going on with fatherhood, what was going on with manhood. Many of us were raised by women who tried to wear both hats, some of whom were just doing the best they could. Some of them had a serious hand in expelling the men from the family, because they had a lot of power in terms of the state, and used that in various ways. So there was a lot of those kind of narratives growing up with a lot of the Black men of my generation. And I could count on one hand how many I met who grew up with their fathers. You know what I mean? So we saw it reflected in the culture. We saw it in hip hop. It was one of the major themes of 80s and 90s hip hop, was, not having your fathers there. So masculinity was always kind of something on my mind, Black masculinity in particular, because that's read a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
But, I primarily went to, working class public schools that were predominantly white, because that's where my mother, she would move us to those areas because we didn't have any money. We were occasionally on welfare, but she felt like at least the quality of education would be slightly better. So we went to those kind of, schools, and, public schools all the way. Went to Cal State as far as college. And that's where I was, formally introduced to Africana studies as a field. Had my first Black male teacher, in college. And that was maybe my junior year, and at that. So most of my teachers had been other, and when I did have Black teachers, they were always women, and that would continue mostly through graduate school, except for a couple of cases. So masculinity became important to me mainly because of its abstraction, its absence. You know what I mean? And in regard to how Black men were received, how I was received, how I would be treated, things that would happen that I didn't know how to understand, and didn't know how to make sense of, and so in the absence of those answers, laid the foundations of some of the questions that would eventually seep into my research.
Yeah. So, so I know that that you were married. Can you talk a little bit about? But just talk about that generally, I suppose.
Sure. Let me see. I met my wife. This was at a time in the 1990s where they had statewide Black student conferences at the college level. And so every year they would hold these conferences in different places. And one year they held it in Bakersfield. And I met her there. She was 3 years younger than me, kind of quiet, always smiling, always very upbeat, which appealed to me because I tend to be a very serious person. And she, she had sickle cell. which I didn't know a lot of.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
She had sickle cell, which I didn't know a lot about, but she had the most chronic version of it. So, like when you see those, you see those commercials where you see kids with leukemia that lived in the hospital. She was one of those kids, except she had sickle cell instead of leukemia. So it was one of those kind of things where, I really didn't understand the gravity of that. But that's, kind of where things started. So we connected. I'd say we first met in about 96. We moved to Oakland together about 98, 99, got married in about 2000. We both wanted kids, both wanted to finish our education. I had thrown a citywide strike in Compton, working for Sylvan Learning System or Center or whatever, when Compton was in receivership. So I lived in South Central I worked in Compton and lived out in Southern California, and then moved up to Oakland, worked in East Palo Alto, did a few things, and then came down in 2000 to start my doctorate. So I had done my bachelor's degree 96. I finished my master's in a year at Temple University, took 3 years off, got married, and started my PhD at the Claremont Colleges in Southern Cal. And, we had gotten married the semester before I started. And, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, we lost about 3 pregnancies, but we're blessed with my son. So most of my viewers know about him. I have he's, man, this kid is 15. It goes fast. Anyway, so 15,
now
15-year-old son.
He's tall. He's tall, right? He's like 6'4" or something.
Oh man, he's 6'6".
Oh goodness.
15 and 6'6" and looking down on me, man. It does something to you, man. And I'm both proud and angry at the same time. Like, where you get all of that? So yeah, man, good kid, sweet kid, but I've been a single father now for about, this is about the 11th year. She passed away in 2009. So yeah, I've been a single father here in Fresno, raising him. So I brought him here when he was about 4, moved her here, and she passed away, not long after we got here. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, sorry to hear about your wife. The single father thing is not talked about as much as obviously as the single mother thing. And
right.
From what I've gathered, the kids are typically better adjusted and do better if they're with their father rather than if they're with their mother. I think that's something that I heard you talk about at some length.
Well, I mean, the data kind of shows in terms of everything from financial stability in the household to, graduation rates. Yeah, children tend to do better under fathers, especially in the Black community. But there's only a small percentage. I want to say it's somewhere between 2 and 4% of, of the community that's actually single father led. The majority, as we all know, is single mother led. So it leads to some very different dynamics that we take on as normal and assume that they have no impact. So when we look at, the behavior of young women who don't know how to understand men, communicate with men, interpret masculinity, a lot of that has to do with the absence of fathers. And then when we look at men trying to define masculinity, like most of my generation, we had to define our masculinity through interactions with each other in popular culture. So most young men I knew, we were piecemealing our masculinity together through pop culture sources, right? So a dab of The Godfather, a dab of I don't believe I'm forgetting the name of the film. Al Pacino, when he plays Tony Montana. I can't remember the name of the film right now. I can't believe I'm blanking on that. But I mean, and then a dab of this and that. I mean, I remember little bits of Richard Pryor, little bits of Bill Cosby. I mean, things that I saw men do, whether it was on television or in person, taking bits and pieces, songs that I heard, particularly in hip hop, and kind of fashioning my own sense of masculinity in that sense, because, what my mother taught me or tried to tell me really wasn't applying to the real world. And
Scarface.
you get to this. Thank you, Scarface. Absolutely.
Scarface.
And you hear it in the music. You hear black men. They're doing the same thing in the music that many of us are doing in life, piecemealing our masculinity together. And a lot of that is because many of us didn't get it at home. I mean, the things my mother tried to tell me weren't lining up with reality. They lined up for my sister. They didn't line up for me. So, when you have cops following you to school and throwing you over the hood of the car and patting you down, just because you're there, there's nothing she was saying that resonated with that. Be quiet, speak when spoken to, don't get in trouble. Those kind of things didn't fit when I wasn't doing anything to get in trouble and I was still in trouble. Teachers that wouldn't meet with me, in the same room alone. From middle school through graduate school, those kinds of things didn't resonate. And, nothing I was hearing from family really explained it,
Yeah, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to try to be vague intentionally, because I don't want to, I'm not trying to out anybody. I think people that know me will have an idea, but yeah, when I was a kid, I'm a musician.
Okay.
And
I see.
And that's how, I started doing that, young, very young. My dad was a great saxophone player, and I got a lesson, 3 lessons a week or something. And plus
nice.
He was listening to me practice with regular commentary.
Okay. You got that hands on.
Yeah, I did. And I'm grateful for that. So I started when I was 6, and when I was in, let's see here. When I was in the 1st grade, I was in the 6th grade band. And when I was in 2nd grade, I was in the 8th grade band. When I was 3rd grade, I was in high school band. And in particular, something went down when I was in 2nd grade. I was 1st chair. Something went down. Now, I went to a rural sort of suburban school where there were very few black families.
Okay.
And so I go, my dad is doing what he thinks he should do to try to get me in situations where I'm going to be challenged. And so I'm playing in the 8th grade band. But there were several parents that weren't in agreement with, their kid wasn't 1st chair, or their kid was, they thought their kids were embarrassed or whatever.
Okay.
And they all sort of got together with the principal and my 2nd grade teacher, and gave me an 8th grade level math test to show that I shouldn't be able to. That I shouldn't be able to. Well, if he can't do his schoolwork. Well, I mean, my dad was, no nonsense. If you're not getting the grades, that you're not doing nothing. So
exactly,
my grades were not an issue. I mean,
okay,
all A student or something. And so what happened was they called my dad and they said, hey, we need to pull your son out of the 8th grade band. This is not working out because he's his math he's falling behind in his mathematics or something. So my dad comes now, he probably heard around the corner. he knew something was funny. So he drove right in and he met with my 2nd grade teacher. And apparently she was so nervous and she broke out in hives because she knew what she did was wrong. And think about the sort of betrayal. Your 2nd grade teacher is like your second mom or something,
Yeah.
That's
especially
like
when you look at hours spent per week in her room with her.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so now I didn't know about any of this, which of course your father shouldn't tell you. Your parents should not tell you if something like that goes down. Because, I'm 2nd grade. How am I going to process that information? I'm thinking about this now, and this is just totally ridiculous. My son is 7 years old. He's in 1st grade right now. Okay. Yeah. So this would be when next year, this kind of thing going down. So obviously he's going to have no sense of how to process that. So this is what my dad told me. Now they all convened, by the way, at the church downtown, right? Many of them were members at the church.
Okay.
So they used their common membership at the church to hatch their plot against me, get me out of there.
Wow.
And obviously, I can't think of any, if I was a white kid, you think they would have done that? I wonder, I bet my name would be on the as you're entering into that little town, my name might be under the thing, under the sign or something, but it didn't go that way. I try not to make everything racial, but it's hard for me to think of another detail that something else that would cause that kind of sequence of events that make it seem like that's okay to do,
right?
That be that bold with that kind of action. So but I'll just tell you this last thing. I was allowed to stay in the 8th grade band because my dad sniffed it out and he said, look, I can't have you coming come after him, blah blah blah. And so he said, look, I'll concede. I still want him to have the opportunity to play with the more mature musicians, but he doesn't have to play first chair.
Wow.
So when I came home one day, because I had been demoted, and I talked to my dad and I said, hey, what happened? He says, well, you must not have been practicing enough.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So he found some kind of way to say, hey, I guess you got to work harder. Now, there's obviously an unfairness with that, but you're given what you're given. And, but the whole idea of working hard, outworking people, keeping your head down, doing a good job, not complaining, all of those kind of things that you think that stuff is going to add up into something positive.
Right.
How do you explain to a 2nd grader that even though he did all of this work and did everything he was supposed to be doing, that this thing happens anyway? It's like that.
Exactly.
It's like that story you tell kids, what's the way to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, of course, you're not going to tell the kid, and it's probably good to kiss the butt of the person that books books the venue, and don't play too well around certain people because they might not want to feel like they're getting shown up, and and you also obviously you don't want to poison them with all of this BS political crap.
Well, it sounds like
it's tough.
It is, and it sounds like your father gave it to you in a way that it may have made you, or he may have wanted you to push yourself harder, even though you didn't do anything wrong. You know, that may have been his way of trying to push you and protect you and give you a framework that you would continue to push yourself harder. But I went through something similar. So it's interesting to me you brought that up. My son and I both did. I mean, when I hit somewhere between fourth and fifth grade, I remember seeing how many kids were going to the gifted program. And, you know, I remember kind of wondering why I didn't see too many people that looked like me, especially not males. So I was just curious. And I remember, you know, I badgered my teacher about it, and then he gave me a test. Now, what I would find out 2 years later is that the questions that he gave me on the test were questions that had material like math that we hadn't been introduced to yet. So I'm being tested on something that I haven't been introduced to. And, you know, when I began to really hang out with some of the kids, because again, we moved every 2 years. So every 2 years, I was at a new school, new people, so on and so forth. But at this particular school, when I began to hang out with them, what I found out is a lot of the kids, especially the white kids, were in after school accelerated programs. So not only were they being accelerated, they were being introduced to material that I wouldn't get in the regular curriculum for a couple of years. And I've noticed these kind of differences. And one of the things I couldn't articulate at that time was, why is nobody advocating for me? Because these people all seem to have some kind of support networks. My mother was at work. She didn't get home till 7 o'clock in the evening every day. So my sister and I would get up in the morning. I wouldn't see her till, you know, a couple hours before I went to bed. So it was like it was almost like a Charlie Brown world where it was just all kids and there's very little connection to adults. The other thing I was going to say is when it comes to my son, you know, obviously with my experience, I really wanted to make sure he had that support. And by his kindergarten, mother just passed, but you know, he's a kid, he's coming in there, he's doing well. By the second week, they wanted to put him in special ed by the second week. And I remember the teacher explaining it to me, you know, and how this is a normal thing and so on and so forth. And I'm like, you don't know who you're talking to. And I'm not an egotistical person, but I mean, I'm saying life experience, everything that brought me to that moment, and education, there's no way in the world I'm gonna let you put him in that. And this is a kid who was reading 700-page Harry Potter books by the first grade. And you want to put him in special ed. Yeah, he was reading Harry Potter himself, you know. So, you know, I didn't let them do that. And sure enough, he was in the top 2 of his class every year. But it got me thinking, like, you know, I'm a professor. I teach 2 days a week. I live right around the corner. I can be up here and sit in class 3 days a week. And, you know, that was a lot of time a lot of Black parents didn't have, but they picked the wrong one because I had that kind of time. So I can come in there and sit. And what I would find is the very things they were complaining about with him as a 5-year-old boy were the same things every other kid in the room was doing. You know, these are kindergarten through 3rd graders. You know what I mean? They're running around putting boogers on each other and acting. They're kids. But I noticed the difference in how he was qualified versus others. And then I began to notice the difference in the teachers. And one of the concepts I talked about is tactile approval. You know, it's really not supposed to be a lot of direct contact with teachers and students these days. But, you know, I would notice these fairly young white female teachers would, you know, give approval to Black and brown kids verbally from a distance, but she would get out of her chair and go touch the white kids that would give the right answers. And it was so I noticed little things like that. And I said, you know, I know at 5 years old, you can't process that, but you can feel it, you know. And my son would say things like, I don't feel like my teacher likes me, you know, those kind of little things. And you're like, yeah, there's more to it there than not. But yeah, so the experiences you're talking about, the experiences I had, because I had plenty more. I mean, and then, you know, of course, the experiences I watched my son have. These were, you know, multi-generational structural, approaches to understanding Black males and to mislabeling them, you know, mischaracterizing them, and then hyper punishing them, and even setting their lifetime educational plans to a lower position very early on. I mean, 5 years old. You know what I mean? They were willing to do this. And if I had not been in a position to step in and then sit in class and let this teacher know, if nothing else, I'm participatory. You're not going to get away with mislabeling him. You know what I mean? Because if I'm at work all day and you're telling me what he's doing, I'm not really in a position to debate with you. I mean, I could say I think he's smarter, but you're telling me what he's done. But when I'm able to sit there and watch you, you know, and it doesn't hurt that I'm 6'2", I'm over 300 pounds, and I got a doctorate. So I'm sitting here looking at you like, you know, and you could, and like you said, with your father coming in, the teacher getting hives, when I would step in the room, oh yeah, you know, there would be a problem. They would start calling security when I was coming up in, and I never raised my voice. I never threatened anybody. I never did any of that. You know, as a matter of fact, by his second grade year, they had segregated him to the back of the room by himself. He was the only black male in the course. You know what I mean? So there was all these kinds of subtle little battles that had to be fought over and over again. Even daycares, you know, it was hard to find a daycare that would take him until I actually found one, a black daycare that was partially run by the Nation of Islam. And once I got there were no problems. It was a room of black women that saw him as a human being first. So if he acted up, he was just a child acting up. He wasn't a monster on his way to being a criminal. You know what I mean? Very different approach to dealing with children. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is aggravating, man. Come on.
Yeah.
You know, I was my dad, you're talking about teachers sort of derailing you even before you get started, you know.
Yeah.
My dad, who literally was a member of Mensa.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
160 IQ. When he was in 8th grade, one of his teachers told him that he should be a brick mason because because he had good hands.
Yeah.
You know,
it's the Malcolm X story. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, if there was a carpenter,
not a lawyer. Yeah.
Right. If there's anyone that was capable of doing anything, it was my dad, you know. And yeah, it's sometimes you hear these stories, and a lot of the stuff that I see you posting, it's and I can tell that you're quite moved by the stuff that you report on Onyx Report. I mean, some of these stories that are just like, come on, man. Yeah. Here it is again. Here's the same old okie doke again and again and again. When is this stuff going to change? I want to pivot a little bit, but not that much. So, I know that at least I heard you talking about being a third-party voter yourself. I think you said you voted Green Party.
Yeah, I've probably been voting Green 20 odd years. I think I voted Nader in 2000, the first time I did. You know, and it's been pretty consistent. I mean, hell, the funniest part is, you know, as much as I'm critical of feminism, I probably voted for more women than most feminists. I mean, I didn't vote for Obama. I actually voted for Cynthia McKinney, you know, because she ran on the Green Party ticket. So, you know.
I didn't vote for Obama either. I think well, I have tenure, so I'm all right. I know you do too. So we're tenure. All right, they can't get me out of there.
He said I have tenure there. I'm all right.
Well, actually, but you know, they can still get you out of there. They have some different strategies to do it. You know, I've seen some really, really ridiculous stuff. You know, it used to be the Academy was one of the places where you could actually have real conversations and talk about controversial topics. You could bring up things that were not popular, and they would actually have a hearing. But now they don't even want to, cats to even show up at campus. They, mobs of students and faculty members even, lined up. We don't want this person here, and everything's hate speech and all that kind of crap. And it's like, come on, that is not helping. One thing I've been pretty critical of is this idea that so academia tends to be sort of a progressive echo chamber. The disproportionate number of faculty members are, they're Democratic donors, right? And a very small percentage are Republican donors, for instance. And you tend to see that sort of bias in the way that things are taught and the perspective that they're taught from. I think conservative-minded folks don't feel particularly comfortable bringing up certain, unpopular topics, pro-life kinds of topics and those sorts of things. It's a pretty uncomfortable kind of thing for a lot of folks. And what's interesting is this is exactly the opposite approach that you would want to take if your desire was to reproduce students that have your same ideology. The reason is that since students aren't typically confronted by strong conservative arguments, they just get the watered down stuff, the stuff that's easy to paint a caricature of. They don't get any strong, argumentation. So then what ends up happening is when they finish school and they're no longer in the echo chamber, they're confronted by people that really know what they're talking about and and can argue very well on that from that perspective.
Right.
So if it was your desire to recreate students that have similar ideologies, and I'm not even saying that should be what people should do. I don't think it is anyway. But if that, but there obviously is a fear. There's a great fear of that. If you want to protect from that, then actually what you should do is you should invite more different viewpoints. And then while you actually have the students there, then you can talk through different perspectives. Now, I largely think that the Republicans and Democrats, this two-party system is a miserable failure. I think that it's responsible jointly. They are jointly responsible for the state of America, for the wealth inequality, for the way that Black people have perennially been treated. I still don't understand. I can't figure it out why Black folks keep signing on the dotted line and putting these Democrats in there. They don't promise us anything, or maybe they make some promises, but we get no deals from them. Every other group, it seems like they're able to make their deals beforehand. We're the only ones that are so gullible that we just keep, even though they still have none of the stuff.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the pushes, because a lot of this has been it's fractured more than I'd ever seen growing up by gender, even within the community in a very different way. Like, for example, when you look at what took place with Ice Cube in the last few months,
exactly,
it wasn't necessary. Now they tried to make it about him being a Trump supporter, and I saw brothers following that line too, and I'm like, that's not the impression I get. I don't know what the man actually voted, but that's not the impression I get. The impression I get is Cube is saying we need to figure out what it is we need, and then barter our votes against what we need with whichever candidate is willing to deal with us. And that was shot down, by certain elements in the community. He was attacked. There was a lot of ad hominem, and then there was an attack on Black men. And I think that, there was a degree of that happening, but I think it was exacerbated after the Cube incident. which I think, fractured things even more, because then it became about, they actually started preemptively suggesting that if the election goes to Trump, it was black men's fault, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever, because the election hadn't even happened. But even beyond that, the record, so because when something hasn't happened, all you have to go on is what's been documented. And in terms of what's been documented, black men have been voting left under Democrats to higher than any other group except black women. And that's the group you're going to suggest is the reason for. First, they said that black men were the reason that that Hillary didn't get elected, and then it became Trump. Even though they were going to be the reason Trump was reelected, even though the election hadn't happened yet. So this kind of misandrist, kind of perspective has, in the last 10 years, 10 to 20 years especially, it's really been showing it. And this going back to what you mentioned very early on about Kevin Samuels. Kevin became, kind of the face of that moment, because he was coming out of this red pill space. He was ready for it, and he had a response. And really, in the last number of decades, black men haven't publicly come out and said anything about this misandry that has been very common in the black community, especially since the 1970s. I think you and I might be in a similar age range. I'm just basing that, we're exactly that. I'm 46 as well. And I remember the impact of the color purple. I remember the Oprah Winfrey era. I remember the Terry McMillan era. I remember the Bell Hooks era. I remember all of these conversations that were backed by policy and placed on a mainstream platform. So all of the ills and frustrations black women had about black men were up for public consumption. Black men primarily had hip hop, right? But that was difficult because, especially in the late 80s and early 90s, you're talking about teenagers and early 20-something-year-olds who were voicing their frustrations as young men and were actually trying to address this burgeoning black feminist era. But, coming from unlettered, relatively young positions. So many of them, for example, weren't married. You know what I'm saying? Many of them weren't, raising kids in-house. There was a lot of things, so they were a slice of black men at a very young age trying to speak to this. So, evidence of this is, when Ice Cube and Angela Davis had some sit-down discussions. It was very mother and child almost, because of the age differentiation, but also the educational difference. So you really didn't see middle-class, middle-aged, highly educated men articulating gender issues within the black community. Most of us just steered cleared from it altogether and let kind of women just go. So, and then two, many of us depended on cultural moments where, because as we saw the eradication of male-only spaces, we depended on cultural moments to kind of fashion a black male opinion. So most black men, for example, if I bring up Richard Pryor talking about not using the N-word anymore, that was a cultural moment. But in terms of gender, if I bring up Eddie Murphy Raw and his reflection on Johnny Carson losing half his money to his wife, which is something Richard Pryor actually talked about as well. But I think there was, because it was the early 90s, there was a little more momentum behind it. So when Eddie Murphy brought it up, that was a cultural moment for men, but black men especially, because Eddie Murphy was the one articulating it. And then you had Chris Rock, and then you have Dave Chappelle, and so these cultural moments started to happen a little more and a little more. And you really have these, what I would call now in retrospect, red pill comics that are making this content, red pill hip hop artists that are making these comments, but they were confined to an album. They were confined to a performance, a show. It wasn't a broad-based conversation among black men because we didn't have the mechanisms for that until the advent of social media. Yeah. So, even though certain platforms like Facebook tended to go more to women, YouTube was a different matter. And now you had black men from the East Coast to the South, to the West Coast, to, to Central America, to outside of the country, to the continent, to Europe. You have black men now being able to share notes. and say, well, this is what I experienced. Well, why, that's strange.
It's
This
the
is what I
same stuff.
experienced.
It's the
Oh,
same
wait a minute.
stuff.
You know, wait, you got divorced and she took, well, that same, that, you know, she got child custody and you had I had to pay alimony. You too? Oh, and so when they started to compare notes, this is why so many people are shocked by Kevin. But more than being shocked by Kevin, they're shocked at Black men having the audacity to be angry. And part of the reason for that is, unlike women who had these spaces that were nurtured and allowed to build to the point where they even had their own vocabulary. And I mean this within the academy. I mean, you know what I mean? Look, if you step foot on any academy space, let's say you're talking to a student and you say, are you going to go take that gender studies course? What is the first assumption that that student is going to make about the course? I mean, you tell me. Gender studies course. What are they going to assume?
Yeah. It's like woman studies. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because in an academic setting, men don't really have a gender as far as academicians are concerned.
Right.
We're not worthy of study unless it's about how we have negatively impacted women and girls and LGBT.
There you go.
See, so when we're talking about these kinds of things, men have not had any accepted spaces where they could congregate without being shamed. So from the locker room to the barber shop, you know, all of these spaces that were considered sacred spaces were now envisioned as spaces that propagated toxic masculinity and needed to be rightly undone by feminism.
Yep.
And so, you know, when you get to this place where men couldn't talk and didn't know where to share, where to dialogue, any of that, all of this is topped off with the cherry on the top of the sundae with Me Too. And Me Too comes along and says, okay, now we need, if we can't send you to jail, if there's no evidence, if the statute of limitations is done, we will retroactively cancel you, even if it's something that happened 30, 40 years ago. And I'm not exaggerating. That's not hyperbole. There were men who were dead, like Rick James, who was canceled in popular culture last year over accusations made about things he did in the 70s. The man is dead.
Yeah.
You know, so you have men losing their jobs, losing their credibility, having their reputations destroyed, even if they couldn't be incriminated in a court of law or sentenced. And so, you know, from those types of tensions, men turn to whatever space they could find where they could freely dialogue. And, you know, especially in a space that's, you know, free, you know, like YouTube. And that's where you started to see it. So it started out, you know, it's very crude. It's very, you know, certain groups of men who are willing to speak. Most of them have their faces covered because the backlash is real.
Yeah.
And so that's where, you know, but for me, as somebody who was becoming more and more interested in Black masculinity, I found fewer and fewer places academically where I could have very real conversations about what was going on with men.
Yeah.
Because academics were more terrified than anybody about being canceled. You know what I mean? So you couldn't have real conversation. Look, I'm gonna tell you, excuse me. One of my grad school professors, one of my mentors, I worked with him for a good 8 years. I didn't have a real conversation with him about gender until after I graduated. I was tenure track and I got him drunk. And once he was drunk, we had the first real conversation about his perspectives regarding gender. And they were as red pill as anybody you ever came across.
Yeah.
But he knew in order to survive in the university, he had to articulate a feminist line.
Right.
And when he started to talk about the experiences he had in the academy, you know, over a 40-year career, it was mind-blowing. But this was all acceptable, you know.
So this you're talking about the locker rooms and the barbershops, and another place that we used to be able to have honest conversations is at church.
Okay. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That is
My father's a pastor. Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's all but gone.
Yeah.
That's all but gone.
Yeah.
You know, the whole there are very few sort of versions of Christianity, whatever you want to call it, branches of Christianity,
Right.
that still maintain a real specific role for, you know, for men and women. I'm Orthodox actually, and I didn't grow up Orthodox, but
Orthodox what?
Eastern Orthodox.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know,
well, because there's Orthodox Islam, and I didn't know which
yeah. Christian.
Okay.
Yeah. Eastern
Okay.
Orthodox. And so the way the story goes is in 1054, you have the schism between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Right. So, and there's several different reasons for that. But most of the issues, I found that most of the issues that I had with the Catholic Church were not issues with the Orthodox Church. Because most of the fragmenting, for instance, the Protestant Reformation was a splintering of the Roman Catholic Church. And also, you know, several things that I didn't understand that didn't make sense to me. Even stuff like the Crusades. That's like a favorite whipping boy for folks that are, you know, have a bone to pick, you know, with the church. They'll go right to the Crusades. Well, the Crusades, that was Roman Catholic, right? So when I was in college, my undergrad, I was a music major, but my minor was comparative religion. And as part of you know, the classes I needed to take, I took a Christian tradition course, and of course they went through this history. It was taught by an ex-Catholic priest that cussed like a sailor in class, which was kind of an interesting kind of thing. But I didn't. It kind of went one ear and out the other. About the Orthodox Church, I wasn't even thinking about it as an option, but I began having more and more issues with stuff like prosperity gospel, because I grew up in kind of a, you know, Pentecostal, you know, word of faith, you know, charismatic kind of background, and so I started asking a lot of questions, and then in particular questions about continuity, you know, because if you ask certain folks, you know, questions about, well, why do we have the Bible? Or, you know, where did the Bible come from? You know, it's almost their entire thing is not to question that, or they themselves haven't done any enough research to know those. And with the whole sort of prosperity and sort of non-denominational kind of churches, there's a emphasis on you know, ministers that didn't go to seminary. You know, it's like, you know, you get your call from the Lord. So that's all you need. You don't need to, you know, to go to seminary. You don't need to to know that. Yeah. So so there was a lot of talking around circles. And so that sort of launched me out. And I first started dealing with Christian apologetics, which satisfied a lot of my intellectual curiosity and certain arguments that made things more palatable for me. But then the whole, what is the church? Where, you know, why do we have 30,000 denominations? What's up with that? That doesn't seem to be the Christian thing. What's going on? The Bible doesn't seem to support that. Yeah. And so that seemed to satisfy that. But I found, but I think another one of the reasons was that I felt at home in the Orthodox Church is that there are clear gender roles. There are very clear gender roles, and certain people are allowed to do certain things based on if they're a man or a woman. Okay. Now that is that's not to say that there is, you know, that women are inferior. Matter of fact, the second most revered person in the history of the church is Mary, right? So it's not an issue of not of not reverencing women. It's just that there is a place for men and there is a place for women, and it just works better that way, rather than all of these sort of trying to remove all of the what is that? What's that saying? I think it might be G.K. Chesterton said, be be wary of what fences or whatever. I can't remember what I'm ruining this.
Okay.
Beware of fences. If you go around removing fences and you don't know what they're there for,
Okay.
you could end up with a whole lot of stuff you don't know what's going to be.
You don't know about, but you're raising a significant point, and I don't think it's limited to Christianity. My family religious background is quite mixed. I was born when I was born, like I said, my father was a Panther. My grandfather in New York, in Brooklyn, was a Muslim minister, an imam. So at that time, my father was a Muslim, and I was raised in Islam the first 5 years. He was an Orthodox Muslim. That's why when you said Orthodox,
I see.
I was like, what did you mean? So I was raised as an Orthodox Muslim my first 5 years. That's where my name comes from, T.HasanJohnson. But my father then, after divorcing my mother, met another woman, was introduced to the church or reintroduced to it, and converted to Christianity, became a Baptist. And so he began to take me to church, and eventually he became a pastor. He's a retired pastor now. But at about 16, I decided to go back into Islam on my own as a young adult man.
I see.
And so I've had Christian and Islamic backgrounds. I flirted with the Nation of Islam. We go through those periods where you're studying everything you can get your hands on. Ancient Kemetic spirituality. I kind of studied all kinds of different things to understand and see what really sat with me. And something you just said a moment ago was very key. You said one of the things that attracted you to, the church was the clear designation of roles, right? I think that the appeal of Islam to a lot of Black men from the 1960s, hell, you can go back to the 50s, if you really want to, with the Nation of Islam's early formation, a lot of it appealed to men, especially after the 70s and 80s, on the basis of gender. And one of the things you saw was a mass exodus, no pun intended, of men leaving the church, and many of them going into Islam. I mean, we know in the United States, the majority of Black folk have been Christian. I haven't seen it disaggregated by gender. I think that would be really interesting, because I remember Pastor, I think his name is Pastor Bryant, Jamal Bryant, used to talk about how many men were going into Islam. But globally, Black folk in general have been more Islamic than Christian. And I'm not promoting competition. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in regard to gender, I think that was one of the main reasons, especially in the United States, that happened. But who gives an excellent breakdown of this? And I was, being the son of a pastor, it kind of shocked me that it took until a few months ago for somebody to give an excellent breakdown that wasn't a formal pastor or Muslim minister, any of that, was, again, Kevin Samuels. Kevin Samuels, as an avid, church goer, gave a breakdown of the Christian church and the Black community on in terms of gender that knocked me out of my chair. Knocked me out of my chair, because he talked about the rise of prosperity gospel, which I remembered, but I hadn't contextualized by gender, especially when, I'm young and just watching people do things that I didn't really understand. But then he framed it in terms of what happened with men in the church as prosperity gospel began to take center stage. And I said, damn, I saw that period happen, but Kevin's a few years older than me. So I didn't know what I was looking at. And I saw a shift in, the Muslim presence, but I didn't know why. And the breakdown he gave was absolutely phenomenal. And it explained even the current moment. And when I called my father after listening to that show, again, retired Baptist pastor, I said, have you heard about this? And he said, yeah, I remember it. And I'm like, what? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, why aren't you guys talking about this? He was like, well, yeah, I remember it happening. And I think the answer was very similar to what most professors say in regard to gender, Black male professors. And the answer was basically, it took off like a rocket. The women had a lot of power. And if you said anything, you had to wonder about your standing, it was that kind of response. But I spoke to a couple of pastors after listening to Kevin break that down, and they were all like, yeah, and when I asked them about, well, what about the men mentoring you? What did they say about that? Oh, they were aware too. Well, how come nobody said anything?
Yeah.
So Kevin was the first one I heard publicly break that down.
Kevin is a bad dude. And he is, I can't think of someone that is better at what it is that he does. His finger is right on the pulse. He knows exactly where this thing is going.
Man, that Clubhouse video was a masterclass on debate as well as Black men's perspectives, a masterclass. But anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no. He's a bad dude. So there's an interesting nexus between Orthodox Christianity and Islam. So Islam is a more recent religion, arising in the 600s, 500 or 600s, and Islam has a lot in common with the Orthodox Church. So, for instance, facing east while praying, that's an Orthodox Christian thing. Praying towards the east several times a day on a schedule, that's also Orthodox Christian. The use of mantras, prayers said over and over and over, and then documented, counted, right? That's an early Christian thing. The dress, the modest dress, especially that women wear. I mean, if you go to, even today, you go to an Orthodox church, and you'll see often women will be sitting on one side, men will be sitting on another side. Women will have their head covered, right? And if you go to the Middle East, it's hard to discern the difference based on the way that people dress of Christians and Muslims, right? So it's a very interesting thing. And of course, my hero is John Coltrane. And
oh wow, yeah,
Coltrane is a very fascinating figure. He was interested in all kinds of religions, but he most notably was sort of bouncing back and forth between Christianity and Islam, and to the point where no one is sure if he was professing as a Christian or as a Muslim when he died.
Especially when you factor in the nature of his professing. I mean, you're professing through jazz,
right?
And God, an improvisational language unto itself.
He had compositions like Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. His one of his seminal works, Giant Steps, which is written in three. It's like a triangle, written in three keys that are equally distant, as a symbolism representing the Trinity, or his why am I not A Love Supreme?
Oh yeah,
which is written in 4 movements, and I'm a minister of music at a missionary Baptist church, and we performed on February 1st. Seems like a time ago because of all of the
Okay.
craziness that's gone on between now and February 1st, 2020.
Okay.
We performed the entire A Love Supreme suite in church.
Ooh.
I mean, we played, I shortened it a little bit. It was about 26, 27 minutes uninterrupted.
Okay. Wow. Now, how did that come across? Because I've never really seen, the relationship between the church and jazz. I've never really had a chance to see how that kind of, it could go down. How was that received?
Yeah, it's an interesting, there's an interesting problem there. So, I mean, you probably remember
the problem.
You probably remember the movie, but Ray Charles with Jamie Foxx.
Oh yeah.
And they're in the club, and some people come in that are from the church, and they're like, "Oh, you're following the music. You're knowing," because he was taking stuff that was like that was known to be church music, and then he was repurposing it for something else, right? But truth be told, all of the music comes out of the same thing. Every form of popular music, jazz, blues, swing, all of that stuff, it all comes out of those early church camp revivals. It all comes out of that, because it was there that you started to see more of an emphasis on personal experience and not as much on scripture per se, but more on one's own experience. And then obviously those camp meeting revivals, those only existed because of earlier stuff that was happening, obviously during slavery, right? So all of that stuff is
you have
the same
to
stuff.
And you have to contextualize it in that way, because if you're being taught Christianity on a plantation, you're being, much of the time we were given a version that was far more amenable to what whites were concerned about than the actual faith itself. And legally speaking, that became the only place that we could congregate in large numbers. So for many Black folk, from Reconstruction onward, much of your life was in the church. Church was a constant and damn near daily thing. Again, I'm a son of a pastor. You leave it up to him. We were in church 7 days a week on one level or another doing something. That was a reality for a lot of us. And so the Black politics, in the civil rights movement comes out of the church.
That's right.
You really can't understand Black life without understanding that. But a lot of that had to do with the tensions around where we could even congregate. And legally speaking, that was the safest place to be for generations. So it's not surprising how much of the music, how much of the expression, how much of the articulation of Blackness comes out of that experience. But there are also questions to be asked when you look at Christianity and Islam, and you really begin to see their origins coming out of Africa, but then being reintroduced to Africa in a very colonizing way. You had Africans re-invoking and at the same time kind of merging their own contemporary practices at that time with what they were being reintroduced to in terms of colonization. So there are all kinds of mixes and mergings. And I think one of the things people overlook the most is when I talk about in the Nile Valley, the library system. And so you have anywhere from a 5,000 to 10,000 year old library system that other groups were trying to control, from Europe. Well, we didn't call them Europeans, the Greeks and the Romans to the Arabs. They were trying to control these. This is one of the reasons Islam took off like a flash once it got into Africa. You really had this system of really data that was thousands of years old that cut your learning curve as a civilization. And so that system in place had a lot to do with the expansion of Islam in a very short period of time across Africa and then up into Southern Europe. So a lot of these things kind of melded into each other in a lot of different ways. But, for me, my center point, in the last decade has really come down to Black men and boys, Black males, really. And the reason that is because I find that the nexus between all the things that I'm most drawn to, that have the most impact, I tend to find come out of those experiences that the males have. So if we're going to talk about the church, one of the things that I'm looking at is the transformation of how Black men are perceived in the church from, you can go back to say the 50s versus today.
Yeah.
How are Black men perceived? How are they treated? How are they regarded? And one of the things that I've heard most is that Black men are oppressive, domineering, patriarchal, abusive men, even in the church.
Yep.
Despite evidence to the contrary, despite documented data, these are the prevailing ideas about Black men. The church somehow becomes, in the imaginary, in the imagination, this oppressive dynamic that oppresses women, even though women outnumber men across the board. So these are the kind of things I find interesting. So you got all this legacy, all this history that we're talking about in terms of what the church has influenced in Black life and American life and across the globe, and yet we can't have this conversation without talking about the ways in which Black men have been denigrated, even in the context of the church in 2021.
Man.
I can't. Hey, everywhere I go, when I look at this stuff, I see it come up. And the church is argued, by many feminists to be, especially in the Black community, the central most oppressive space. And I'm like, this is something that even in the 1970s, Robert Staples, noted sociologist, was saying, when you look at the major institutions in the Black community, Black men aren't present. And the two he mentioned was the family and the church.
Yep.
He said, in the family, you have female-headed households, and in the church, you have Black male pastors, but Black men leaving. And yet, the reputation about Black men in these environments still somehow holds.
Man, we well, like I said, we have tenure, so we're all right. But the whole, okay, let's talk about the Black church. So men are missing in the Black church, right? They're not there. You get beyond the age where your parents can force you to go, your mom can make you go, and they say, I'm out.
Right.
And now there is this natural dip where people that get to a certain age, maybe it's because they go away to college, and then it takes them a few years to get things going. And then it's like, okay, now I'm starting a family. Okay, it seems like maybe this religion thing is kind of important, and then they start to come back. But in the case of what's happening in our community, that they just not coming back. They're just not coming back. And the reason I think they're not coming back is because when they were gone, there's some practical reasons why things have gone a certain direction. So you have all of these, there's a lot of women in Black church, right? A lot of single mothers, you have that whole thing going on. And the pastor cannot be deaf or blind to the fact that most of the people that are in the pews are a certain, they fit a certain demographic.
Yes, sir.
So if you ignore that, then you're probably not serving the people. You can't be blind to that, right? So I think that there is a practical thing, but I think it's gone so far so that if you're a guy and you're in church, it's like, what am I getting? What am I getting out of this?
Oh yeah.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't. That's not the kind of stuff I need to hear.
But what you're saying is they're subtly figuring out upon walking in and kind of testing the water, you know, because you might go to a different church, you might move to a new area and you fill out a few different churches. And when it becomes clear that you're not the target audience, when it becomes clear that the message is catered to the majority of the room, and, you know, because I would dip in and, you know, I'd listen to some popular, you know, pastors that people are talking about, you know, and just kind of listen to the tone of some of the sermons. One of the things that I would often hear was a kind of punitive, punishing tone to Black men.
Oh.
Be better fathers, be better husbands, love her, secure her, listen to her, you know, these kind of things, but very little pushback. I mean, occasionally, I'm not going to take everything away, occasionally, but for the most part, the slant was fairly consistent.
Happy
and then
wife,
when the
happy
camera
life.
would pan, and when the camera would pan on the audience, I'd say, there we go. Overwhelmingly majority female. I'm like, okay, so you're feeding yourself. I understand. But as you point out, the problem with that is men are saying, okay, this isn't balanced. And then on top of that, and you would be better able to speak to this than I would, this is not the church I grew up in.
No.
And, you know, and again, that's one of the reasons I tip my hat to Kevin, because to me, it took a Black YouTuber to say it. And then I'm finding out how many generations of Black men know about it, but haven't. And I'm just saying, you know, I sensed it, I experienced it, but sometimes, you know, you just, it doesn't process, you know, whatever that issue may be. And when it became clear, I said, wow, this has been going on for a while. And that's one of the things that really drew me to the study of Black men is there were so many spaces where, you know, I grew up and I experienced certain things, but it didn't click. It didn't all come together. And when it did, I found the same issues impacting us in the same ways in so many different environments. And it blew my mind. And it blew my mind more than anything, how many of us knew about it, know about it, but don't speak on it. And so, you know, for me, it was like, okay, well, if I want to study this, I can keep sitting here and just coming up with things off my head, or I can actually talk to the men who are at least willing to talk about it, which is what brought me to, you know, YouTube in many ways. But I can say that, look, if you look at my first book, my only book really, I wrote a book on hip hop. And I wrote a book on hip hop because I teach hip hop, right? There's a whole section on gender. And it's broken up into 3 parts. 2 of the 3 parts are on women. When I got to the section on men, it's literally only a couple of pages long, because I realized after 20 years of higher ed, a doctorate, the only studies I had dealing with anything gendered were feminist studies, because that's all there were. Or at least all there were in terms of what was being taught in class. And I realized writing that book how unprepared, ill-prepared, incapable I was of talking about men outside of the way feminists told me to. And that's when I finally got the book back, you know, in the mail, first printing, I opened it up and you feel pride. You got your first book, your name is printed. You're like, wow. And I opened up to the section on Black men. It was literally a couple pages long. And I said, oh my God. That's when it really hit me in the face. Despite all that writing, sometimes you're just too close to it. But when I actually opened up the book, I said, okay, I'm seeing it. And I noticed when I started teaching my first Black male class, for the first couple of years, it was a popular class because my Black female students liked to come in and see the males be punished, much like in church. You know, because the literature was so heavily feminist, it was, you know, it was tipped in their favor. So analyses were correct if they were punitive to men and held women up. And it wasn't until I began to center male voices that I saw a drop in the number of Black female students, an increase in the number of Black male students, and more men starting to talk. But the biggest issue was that men did not have a vocabulary to explain and articulate their experiences, but the women did. Men didn't have a set of values, but the women did, right? And so I talk about this on my show all the time. When I ask the young women, no, I ask the young men, I say, how many women that you dated or interacted with, have a list of requirements from a male suitor that wants to get with them. I've never had a class where I haven't had a man raise his hand. Every woman they've come across has a long list of requirements. Yep. Be over 6 foot tall, yep. Make 6 figures, have a certain penis length, all these various types of things. Right. When I ask the women, how many of you have run across a man that has a list of requirements and standards that he articulates to you very early on? Not once have I had a female raise her hand. Yep. So what that taught me was that there was a difference in how men and women were being socialized, especially in the last 30 years. Well, the interesting part to me is when I got them to start talking about their dating and mating lives on campus, the young women, 17 to 20, were demanding 6 figures from the men they were sitting in class with. And this is why Kevin was so interested in my statements. He doesn't really quote my theories and concepts. What he talks about is what I mentioned about the classroom. Mm-hmm. So the two things he's drawn to is the women requiring 6 figures of the male students they're sitting next to, who are often first generation Black college students themselves, coming to college on loans with nothing, right? Mm-hmm. And the second thing Kevin is interested in is the drop of Black female students in my class and the rise of white and Latina students who are coming in because they're interested in understanding Black men. Whereas my Black female students were often coming in to hear very punitive approaches to analyzing gender that privilege the girls and penalize the males. And so, you know, shifting those dynamics has been interesting. Yeah.
So, you know, I was saying before, you know, that whole happy wife, happy life business. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, part of the issue that I have with that is that it completely overlooks the interests of the man. It treats them as if they are not an issue. And maybe there was a time when if you prioritized, you know, what the woman wanted, that things would work out. But I'm sorry to say that I think we're beyond that. I don't think that if you come to a situation and you're not able to stipulate what it is that you want and what your expectations are, you're going to get drugged. Mm. And I'm in my second marriage, right? So you know, I got drugged in the first one. You know.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, and you know, you sent me a response to one of my emails, where you said, you know, how did I basically something to the effect of, you know, red pilled but married. Now that's the question to be answered.
Yeah, how do you reconcile that? Well, I was like, maybe I should interview you on your show. That's a critical question.
Well, what's interesting is that's one reason why Kevin is different. Is because Kevin advocates for marriage, but he is as red pill as anybody. He just wants to see, you know, there's been this big schism that has been, placed between Black men and women. And there's a lot of echo chambers where women are talking to each other. And then there are echo chambers where men are talking to each other. One thing that makes his show different is that we know that men and women are there. Everybody's there.
Right.
You know, and so everybody's part of this conversation. And I also don't like this idea of creating this sort of false equivalency between, let's see, how do I want to say this? You know, it's the thing, you get in an argument with someone, and rather than dealing with the actual issues or the actual point that you say, they just pull out something else and throw it out there. And it could be something that is totally not even close. But I think that women have been allowed to do that for so long that I think it's almost I think it's almost like jarring for them to hear someone to just to give it to them straight like that. And that the whole controversy, the average at best thing, this is a good example of this, because she doesn't say anything about what she's going to bring to the table. She just knows that she wants someone that's making six figures, right? And for some reason, there's this idea and misinformed conception that somehow if you make mistakes when you're younger, that somehow you're supposed to be able to charge a higher price when you get older. And that's just not, it's just not how it works. It's not how it works.
What you're talking about and what Kevin is talking about is sexual marketplace value. And, and it's a concept that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. But if you look at the text dataclysms, what it's based on is the dating behavior of over 1 million people through dating apps, right? So it's not just, I'm going to sit here and give theories about men and women based on a couple of women that I dated and, how my marriage went. No, you're talking about over 1 million people documented engaging people in certain ways. So when they make statements about the two most unpopular people in the dating market tend to be Asian men and Black women, it's not based on a slanted opinion about Asian men or Black women. It's based on the dating methods or not methods, but the dating behavior of people on these dating sites. Right. You know what I mean? And so when you begin to look at the behavior, it begins to allow us to reflect on human engagement in different ways. And one of the things that sexual marketplace value really, brings to the fore is that the two most popular demographics in dating across race and gender tend to be younger women and older men of means.
Yep.
Those are the two beings that dominate the sexual marketplace, because it takes men a long time to amass experience and, material stability, which tend to be the things that women seem to value most. It's not to say they don't value looks. It's not to say they don't value other things, but it is to say that security tends to rank very high with women. And this has been brought out this even more during the pandemic. I mean, I'll go so far as to say that Kevin's meteoric rise in many ways is owed to the pandemic too.
Yep.
Because
captive
the
audience.
Pandemic brought out it. Well, not only a captive audience, and that is true, but also there was a level of desperation and frustration and insecurity because the economy was all over the place. And now all of a sudden, the structures that have been in place that have propelled women in many ways were now shaking. And so, what, especially in the Black community, right? Because if you go back to the 1960s, working class to underclass women could depend on welfare. Middle class women could depend on college access. And in the 70s, college was becoming this entrance into the middle class, which is how we got in the early 80s, the rise of Bill Cosby and this idea of going to college as a standard of respectability and entrance into the middle class. So those two dynamics, welfare, college access, meant that you had a floor that really kept you from being completely on the cement outside. You had this floor for women. Mm-hmm. Men didn't necessarily have that. In terms of welfare, especially Black men. You talk about the man in the house rule. Welfare did not include you for a good period of time. It wasn't something you could depend on. Middle class access, we literally have half the degrees Black women have. From 1976 to 2018, we literally have half the degrees that Black women have. So we didn't really get to enjoy the entrance into the middle class in the same way. And what exacerbated that more than anything, the two things, deindustrialization in the 70s, which wiped out a lot of our blue collar employment, and the war on drugs.
Yeah.
So those two things sent black men on a downward spiral and offered black women stability. And so when you look at, and there's a long list of policy-based issues that provided black women a floor that black men didn't get. And so that bifurcation came to a head in 2020 when the state began to step back. I remember when Trump was sending people food boxes, folks lost their minds. Right. So when the state started to, even gesture at moving back from providing the security that it had been, now all of a sudden the question became, well, what other structures can we look to provide that stability? And most groups have to negotiate along the lines of gender. We've not really had to in the Black community. Women have not really had to depend on men. They had other means. 2020, they had to be reintroduced to negotiating with their men. This is why Kevin became so popular, because after 30, 40 years of Black women not really having to negotiate with Black men in any structured or serious way, because the state had replaced us in many ways, they had to figure out how, and the core of it was many didn't know how to at all. Many didn't even know how to talk to Black men, let alone hear what Black men wanted, let alone really understand masculinity. To them, masculinity was, like I did a show about this a couple weeks ago. There's a young woman who's very popular now on social media, and she normally does videos advocating for men in a fairly humane way. But she did this strange video out of nowhere, directed at other Black women, that said, "I'm discovering how useful men are." This is a Black woman, so she's talking about Black men. And she's saying, I asked my brother to show me how to use a gun, and he was happy to.
Oh, yeah.
I asked my other brother to help me move, and he was happy to.
I saw that.
So she was lecturing Black women on appreciating Black men. But the twist was, it was only in terms of their utility.
Right.
And it demanded nothing of women to extend to men or to offer men. Because the idea was that, really, you don't need to offer them anything. They are privileged to be in your presence. So you assess their value and utility to yourself and maybe give them a chance on those grounds. But we're not really going to have a conversation about whether Black men demand anything of you. And one of the reasons Kevin has been so, frustrating, especially for a lot of women, is he's saying, okay, this top 5 to 10% of men you want, they demand things of you. And many of you won't make the cut. And part of the audacity of that and the response of that, but especially by, highly educated middle-class women, is how dare somebody say, I'm not qualified? What do you mean? What do you mean I don't? We've been playing this game solely on terms established by women and really terms that haven't included men. And so when Kevin says these are the things that men want, especially the high-profile men you say you want, there's pushback, because many of these women have not been forced to have to listen to men and adapt to men's requirements. Yeah. And he's still only talking about the top 5 to 10%. Even to make the statement that, Black men have standards and they require things. I mean, when you get to the point where 51% of Black men are unmarried and without children, that would seem like a common sense thing to ask. What is it that these unmarried men want? Because apparently they're not married. But that question is not really being asked. It's really being presented as these men are wayward, they're lazy, they fear commitment, they're, whatever. And since the 1980s, these popular ways of interpreting Black men have been acceptable. I mean, I've gone to academic conferences and heard the same line of conversation from scholars. No citations, no analyses, no data. Yep. Personal experiences presented on an academic stage, and this was considered acceptable. So, all of that is being pushed and challenged because the environment has radically shifted and people are terrified now. I've been saying this for the longest. When Black America lost half of its employment in March of 2020, I don't think that was men. Because in over 30 major cities, Black men were already unemployed up to 40 and 50%. I think it was women that were losing their jobs. I'm getting reports from brothers around the country that women driving Mercedes Benzes are delivering groceries during the pandemic. women, I think, lost their employment significantly. And the question became, well, when you look at white America, you look at two-parent households, if one person loses their job, they have a partner.
That's right.
Between the two, they may be able to work that out. Well, how can we get partnered up again? There's a long history that needs to be brought to bear, and there needs to be a lot stated in the conversations that need to happen for Black men and women to renegotiate, and a lot of that Black men have not been able to say.
There's another dynamic too, you know, there's this and you hear this in the red pill community stated often, and that is that 20% of the men are having sex with 80% of the women. Okay, so there's some statistics that we know that, for instance, what is it, 59% of single mothers have babies by multiple fathers, but 51% of Black men are single and childless. 64% are in the middle class, not dusties. And so it's so it seems that part of what's happening is that women are developing their animus dealing with 20% of the men, and they're developing their whole view in everything based on these 20%, which tend to have multiple baby mamas and all of that. But then you have the 80% of men that are left over, right? The ones that they've been passing over, haven't even considered them, you know, you know, as even, you know, valid or worthy, right? And that 80% of men are saying, look, you know, what that 80% of men are not they're not these worthless throwaways that they get characterized as, right? They have value, have worth, right? But these women are unable to see that. But then they're willing to throw all Black men away, and you have these swirlers, you know, where they have failed to lock down a quality Black man because they themselves were dealing with the 20% that are pumping and dumping and have multiple baby mamas and everything else.
And many of them are finding that white husbands are, one, not easy to secure, because statistically white men really don't want Black women.
Yep.
But also a lot of these celebrities who are swirling are getting divorced. So we're starting to see that, particularly Black women. You're starting to see these divorces happen, and all these debates going back and forth about how effective swirling is as you know, going to what, you know, Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore used to call escape hatches. You know, how effective these escape hatches aren't.
The other thing I think that's happening is with the growing appeal of the red pill perspective among men. I think a lot of men that would have been a good mark for a woman that had, you know, 3 babies by 4 dudes. I say that because one of them, she's not sure which one's the father, but she's still getting a check from both. And what would have been a good mark for them, they're waking up. They're saying, you know what? I'm not playing this game. This is not a good deal. This is never going to be a good deal. This is never going to work out. You know, my sort of introduction to red pill is through Solomon Jones, Solo TV 84. And it's interesting because I talked to a lot of folks about this, and it seems like a lot of folks sort of got into some of the stuff through him, because he's into anime and he's into other things, and it seems like an interesting sort of way that happens. People sort of find the same sort of nexus or whatever. And he put a video out. This is years and years ago. He was one of the sort of OG red pill content guys.
Right.
One about don't date single mothers. And he put that out there not because he necessarily had anything against all single mothers. He was basically just saying, this is the experience that I had. He dated a single mother. He got drugged.
Right.
And he's like, hey, you might want to watch out for this. But even saying things like that, I have a new series called Blue Pill Testimonials, where I'm basically talking about, stuff that happened before I became aware. And I have dozens and dozens of stories. But I'm not trying to dump anybody. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to put anybody on blast or anything like that. This is just, it's simply like, look, these are things that happen. You might want to look out for this, and everybody, it seems that everybody is having the same experience. It's like over and over and over. And it's amazing how almost identical the details are. That reminds me of a post that I saw of yours on Facebook, I think it was, where you said a friend of yours, I guess he had just gone through a breakup or something, and you basically called out, line by line, like exactly what his experience was. And one of the things that you called out in particular was something that you referred to as being, let's see here. Oh man, I had it in my head. What is it? Sexual alienation.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? I mean, I know what you mean, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Hold on. I think something's going on with my video. Sorry, I think there we go. I was froze up for a minute. Sorry. So wait, let me see. So you were talking about the post where my friend had called me, and he said to me that his daughters weren't speaking to him. And I hadn't talked to him in a long time. So I said, and you notice when you've been dealing in these circles long enough, you see the patterns.
Yeah.
And after a while, you don't need to hear as much to know what the pattern is. So, I was just like, so in other words, you got divorced and your kids took her side. And he was like, yeah, like, how did you know? And I'm like, men have been talking, brother. You need to get in this conversation because it's not just you, so so I began to call out things. Your father wasn't home. You grew up by, in a single mother household. She taught you how to serve women. She never really, and I'm adding some things I didn't put in that post that were part of the discussion. She taught you how to serve women. She didn't teach you what to require of them. So we had this long discussion where I was just pointing out bullet point after bullet point of things that were very consistent in the Black male experience as far as dealing with women. And, we talked about this point where he was dating an older woman. And the last time I had really been around him, it was like in the mid-90s. He was dating, I remember he had a younger woman and an older woman. And he was trying to decide which one to get with. And, the younger woman was in the club. She was partying. She was being young. The older woman would make meals for him. She would draw baths for him when he came to visit. He wasn't ready for that game. You know what I mean? He was not ready for that older woman game. Okay. She had full course meals and hot baths with bubbles drawn when he come. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready, man. And the thing about it was he ended up choosing, the older woman. They had a child. And from there, what he noticed is as soon as she was pregnant, she talked about marriage. She required it. They got married. And then from there, she just began to check out. Now, I can say I had some of that experience as well, even though my wife was a few years younger. A few years after we got married, she, checked out. It was a good 5 years where there was no intimacy whatsoever. And I didn't understand it. And so when it happened with him, I knew it. I said, so you got married, you got pregnant, even though she was on birth control and, you know, you guys hadn't talked about a pregnancy. She told you you didn't have to wear anything. Everything would be good. He said, yeah. I said, and then all of a sudden she was pregnant. He said, yeah. And I said, then she was talking about marriage. She said, yeah. I said, so you got married and then all of a sudden everything stopped. And he was like, yeah. I said, man, this isn't an uncommon story. This is actually quite common. You know, she got out of you what she wanted. And then we talk about, you know, alpha, F's, beta, you know. In other words, we talk about the ways in which the men that are desired are treated one way, and the men that will be good partners, even though they're not necessarily who are desired, are treated another way. He was the latter. You know, he was acceptable, respectable, educated, stable, but you know, I started talking about this concept I called a ConcuSurf. And it came out of an older concept when I was dating in the 90s, where I noticed that women would kind of date you and they'd have their entire lives set up and they'd say, look, I just need a man that would just fit here. Don't say nothing. Don't do anything. I just need you to look good and work here because I got this. I got my career. I got my life together. I don't really care what you got going on. I used to call it insert man here because that's how frequently. And this is, you know, this is mid 1990s. So there was no red pill discussion. Yeah. I just noticed after dating and talking to men, it was like all of these women just wanted someone to fit into their life, shut up, be quiet, and do what I want. And so, you know, last year I started calling it a ConcuSurf. In other words, you know, what I found, you know, happening was that men were being asked to be this kind of mixture of concubines and serfs. In other words, your job is to provide protection, sperm, and sexual gratification. And other than that, you really need to be quiet. So there's another level of sexual objectification for men. But again, it's not something vetted in the university because you can't have these conversations in the university unless they prioritize women. So so again, it came more out of the discussions with other men about what we were noticing the commonalities were in what was expected of us, the social expectations in marriage and in mating that was repeatedly the same way. And it was a product really of multiple generations of women in our community, not necessarily having to rely on men or have men participate to any great degree. As a matter of fact, I even argue that going back to the 1970s, much of what happened when men had this mass exodus from the family, so to speak, because we used to be married more than any other group.
That's right.
And that didn't shift in slavery. That shifted in the early 1970s. And the reason it shifted was because you had this shift in marital policy. You had family courts. You had no-fault divorce. Right. See, the major differences in Black male and female life are more often than not policy-based. So when men left the family, so to speak, it was in many ways what I categorize as a silent protest. And the only difference between that generation and the ones now is we stay in our children's lives statistically more than any other group of men. But marriage? No.
Yeah. But also, you know, I argue this frequently. What the Black community is suffering, the reverberations of, I think, more intensely than the reverberations of slavery, is forced integration.
Okay.
And now I think forced integration also causes some of these other things with policy that you're talking about also. Obviously slavery was terrible and had bad ramifications for our community and everything. However, you had Black Wall Street, you had all of these. I mean, you had Black folks were married more than other folks, more than white folks were. I mean, you had all of this stuff, and we were starting to build assets. Then the forced integration stuff. Okay, now real integration would have been bring white folks into the Black community too, not just take Black folks and disperse them out. And so the integration issue was not the problem; it was the way that it was done. That created
okay.
these issues.
Well, I mean, especially when you look at how Black Wall Street ends, you have just abject terrorism in terms of, you know, in terms of a response to Black progress, right? Where you just have people just, torn out of their houses and burned and killed. Right. There was a documentary, and the guy, actually, I can't recall his name. He came to Fresno State and he gave a presentation on it, and it was dealing with Black Wall Street. And he actually talked about interviewing an elderly white man who was a little boy at that time. And he said, this white man had told him that after, the terrorism of it all, right? He said he was a little boy at the time. He was walking by a Black cemetery in the Greenwood area of Tulsa. And he said he watched them loading Black bodies into a wood chipper. And the wood chipper was spitting out the flesh, and that was mixed into the soil for the graves. So, what he was basically saying is they weren't even buried. They became the dirt that those who were buried afterwards were buried in. And that was the response to Black progress. Fast forward to the 1960s and 1970s, and what we start to see is really a two-track system. And this had a lot to do with the onset of white feminism, right? Promising Black women results the civil rights movement couldn't, and really offsetting and distracting from the civil rights movement. Because, it's around the same time period, white women become the biggest minority out of every group, which makes absolutely no sense. So they reabsorb affirmative action dollars back into the white household. Black women become subsidiaries in that process where they benefit from double minority status, right? So you have companies that'll hire them because they're Black and female. Black men get the short end of the stick when it came to that.
Yeah,
right? So when we see these changes, they're massive. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Minister Japp, Minister Japp always says that he says that the free-thinking Black man, so the free-thinking straight Black man is the last minority, is the only actual minority. Because it's like all of these other groups are getting catered to, but we don't get nothing. They just ignore us. And if you can talk a little bit about, you have on your, let's see here, where is it at? The political agenda, the Black male political agenda.
Oh, okay.
So, and this, and the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, you have something that you say at the end of each one of your Onyx reports, and so I want to dig a little bit there. But this, can you talk a little bit about how this started? And
okay, it actually leads into one of the things I was just about to say too. Your point about Black males and being minorities is real. Because, one of the things I would ask brothers when I'd hear them debating about, Biden versus Trump is, under either presidency, how much of Black life radically changes. And there would almost always be silence. Yep. Because the reality is neither party is really thinking about us. And I mean, we started to see Democrats attempting to superficially cater to us to a small extent. I mean, their version of doing that was putting strippers on poles and telling us to vote. Oh my
goodness gracious!
Was patronizing and offensive.
Oh my goodness!
Across the board, because it told us basically that you're not really serious, you're not intelligent, you don't vote intelligent, you just need to see some ass on the screen, and that'll get you to the polls. And that's what we think of you. That's basically what that was. Was ridiculous, but. Anyway,
I was so offended by that, man. I sent that joint to a bunch of my friends. And I was like, this is what they think of us.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you're right. That is what they think of us. So one of the reasons I started the Black male political agenda is it dawned on me that, one, I'd never actually seen one. And I'm not, look, religion and politics are not things that I cover in my show for a reason. Because I'm trying to bring Black men together And I've seen those two subjects rip brothers apart so fast. Yeah. I mean, if I talk about, Christianity, Islam, Hebrew, Israelites, there will be arguments within arguments within arguments. Yeah. I've seen, it can be ancient Egyptian Kemetic spirituality. There are camps within that fight. Mm-hmm. Pan-Africanism, there's so many areas that we go to war with each other on that I try to stay middle of the road, not because I'm afraid to broach those subjects in terms of my own beliefs, but because I already know what happens when we do that. And I end up with, 10 brothers sitting in a room saying, yeah, we all agree with each other on everything. Well, all right. But right about now, we got to actually bring Black men together, because really there's nobody else, as we often say, there's nobody else coming for us. Yeah. So middle of last year in the summer, pandemic raging and all of that, I started to say, well, look, we need to actually have a political agenda to articulate our issues separate and apart from what's considered Black in and of itself. And I based that on two concepts. Concept, well, that I appropriated from Yvette Carnell, which had to do with flat Blackness, and another I call flat maleness. Mm-hmm. Flat Blackness is basically this idea that when it comes to Black issues, all Black issues are relevant when it comes to advancing, especially women, girls, LGBT. But when you want to specify by gender, we got to take everybody into account except for heterosexual Black men. But the numbers that are relevant to heterosexual Black men can still be used. So what do I mean? When we talk about incarceration and how it affects the Black community, you'll hear people say X percentage of Black people are incarcerated. Fine. But when you want to talk about something gender specific, we don't talk about Black men. Black men don't have a gender, even though we're the ones going to prison more than any other. So there's this kind of selective erasure of Black men when it comes to all things Black. But the numbers and the experiences of Black men are relevant, especially if you talk about a group like Black Lives Matter, right? Who have nothing to say about heterosexual Black men, but have no problem being the first ones on the scene when Black men are dead. But to bait and switch the conversation and take it away from the very dead Black men that they're claiming to represent. So flat Blackness being that, and flat maleness is this idea propagated by feminism that all men are the same. We all have penises, therefore we're all oppressive patriarchs, and we all enjoy privilege that women don't have. There is a vast difference between white men, Black men, Latino, Asian. There are differences within each group. But all of those differences get kind of brushed in a very superficial manner away into this category of anybody with a penis is a patriarch. So I talked about those two concepts. And from that, I said, politically, we need to talk specifically about what Black men need, because I noticed Black men couldn't do it. We couldn't articulate our our political interests outside of the things we've been told. And what we were often told was how to foreground, women, feminism, so on and so forth. But we didn't know how to talk about ourselves and our needs outside of that. So I started asking brothers instead, because I could write a list. I could do it. I could write 50 points off the head, but I don't know how many would listen. So instead I asked Black men, you send me the list of issues that pertain to us that nobody talks about. And slowly but surely, men started to contribute and bring up points and bring up experiences. And my only thing was, okay, I'm going to make sure I try and point this to policy. So however it comes to me, I'm asking that y'all point it to policy first. But if you don't, that's what I'm going to kind of do. I'm going to reshape it into something that's policy based, or could be, and post it up and leave it there for people to contribute to indefinitely. And so we just got this list, and I found that Black men were often inspired by it, but most people didn't really know what to do with it. Nobody really knew what to do.
Dude, this is thank you for doing that. It's the first time I've seen something like this. The only time I saw
in 2020, isn't that a trip?
Yeah, it's. I mean, and honestly, the contract with Black America, that's the first time I saw something like that. This is the first time I'm seeing something like this. But I'm going to read one of them so people can get a flavor for some of the stuff that's on this list, because
Mhm.
Now I'm going to pick something that's could be considered somewhat inflammatory.
Okay.
Financial abortion.
Mhm.
As we as we understand the law, it is a woman's right to choose whether or not she will carry a baby to term, but the child up for adoption or abort it within the first 6 months after being informed about the pregnancy, men should have the right to financially disassociate themselves from the pregnancy. Now, it seems
Mhm.
to me that somewhat of a, maybe this happened at the same time, or somewhat of a genesis is the Dave Chappelle bit.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Now,
he tells jokes, but he's
in
telling a lot of truth.
oh man, he's bringing fire, man. Now this concept though has been around the manosphere for a while. It's not new. But the thing about it is Dave presented it in such a common sense way that he forced people to think about it that normally wouldn't have.
Mhm.
So and there's no way I can tell it as fun is in a funny manner the way he did, but it was brilliant because what he basically said was, if you have the right to kill him, I should at least have the right to abandon this child. And he said, and if you have a problem with that, then maybe I'm not wrong, maybe we're wrong. So if you take issue with me leaving the child, but you want to retain the right to kill him,
Right.
and you want to make the onus of all of this, maybe we got a bigger problem than me, but the logic of it is dead on because the whole notion of a financial abortion is basically that women have had the right to choose, and that's great. But we act like because that process physically takes so much, in terms of women, that men should have no say so whatsoever. And I've been in this situation. I've gotten women pregnant that I didn't want to get pregnant, and I've had pregnancies that I wanted to have continue on, but she decided against it. I had no say in either capacity. The most I could do is suggest at her request, because if I even brought it up and she didn't want to hear it, it was a problem. So, men just tend to have no power. And I recently heard an ardent feminist say, well, your power is in what you do before you have sex. And I said, that's strange because that's the logic we used to use um, uh, uh, before we had birth control. When we would talk about young girls getting pregnant, the logic was, well, she should have kept her legs closed. We've reversed that now. And the logic is, well, you shouldn't have taken your penis out. You shouldn't have had sex. It's ridiculous. So the financial abortion argument is basically if she has the right to choose with her body, and she should, men should have the right to choose with their wallets. Because if you don't want to be a father, and there's so many ways that men can be, I won't say seduced, but can be, unjustly kind of exploited and manipulated. And it happens every day. We don't talk about it because it's not considered politically correct. But the reality is there are many men who end up in situations where they've gotten somebody pregnant that they don't, in a pregnancy they're not necessarily ready for. And we don't like to have these kind of conversations too, especially many of us who have a religious background. That's a hard conversation to have. And it can be a hard one to be honest with ourselves about. But at the end of the day, the policy just suggests that men should have the choice. If women have the choice, men should have the choice. And all of a sudden, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I go back to the way Dave explained it. If it's a problem for us, then maybe it's a bigger problem than just us.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
And the statement that you make at the end of your show, I don't know if you have that handy. You probably do.
I can pull it up. It kind of came about organically. Basically, I started what I did. I think this was mid 2019 is when I started my show. I started doing just online radio, and I didn't bring it to YouTube till about December 2019, January 2020. And it started out just as, I wanted to give Black men an alternative way of seeing ourselves. And from there, once I did it the first time, people started sharing it, and they would be like, you don't even have to listen to the show. Just scroll to the end and listen to what he said. And it kind of took off because, and I had so many men that started writing me, brothers, sometimes in tears, telling me that they're crying when they were crying when they heard it. And that moved me because I didn't expect it to have that kind of impact. But in fact, I thought it might be even received as a joke because it's so long, but it touched a lot of Black men. I'm here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic, selfish, and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.
God bless you, man. And thanks so much for your time and energy.
And likewise, man. I appreciate you having this and welcoming me to your platform.
You got it,
Thank
man.
you.
God bless.